So for today's session, we are going to focus on z-test for proportion, and this will be the last part 4 for this week, test of hypothesis. So for the last type of test statistic, ito ay ginagamit sa proportion wherein marami kayong hypothesis testing situations na ma-encounter and it involves proportion. Ibig sabihin, meron lang tayong certain characteristic, certain part or fraction of the whole population or the whole sample na gustong malaman or itest, and titingnan natin kung meron ba yun effect sa result or sa conclusion na ating gagawin. Kasi yung variables na nadidiscover natin, lahat po yan ay may effect sa ating gagawing study or sa ginagawa nating study. Pero meron tayong gustong part or certain characteristic na malaman. For example, ang variable natin ay gender. Ang gender, it's either a female or male. Sa ating study, nilalagay doon or ini-interpret natin yung data whether majority of the participants ay female o kaya male. Tapos, pag nalaman na natin yung proportion, pwede na tayong mag-conclude na halimbawa, female ay may malaking effect or factor which is makaka-affect dun sa ating study. Okay? So, to evaluate the observed value against the expected value, we are going to use z-score. Katulad ng one sample z-test na diniscuss ko sa part 2. Pero dito, focus lang tayo sa proportion. Pero yung steps na gagawin natin, nearly the same. Siguro meron lang tayong changes kung paano natin ini-interpret yung problem, ina-analyze. Meron lang din tayong changes sa notation na gagamitin. Pero yung process ng pag-apply ng z-test, pareho lang ng sa part 2. That is the one sample z-test. And ang sample size natin must be greater than or equal to 30 para mag-satisfy dito sa ating test statistic. Okay? So the resulting answer is called the test value, and the formula is p hat minus p divided by the square root of pq over n. Iba na yung formula natin for z because it pertains to proportion. Remember, dun sa ating previous discussion, I think chapter 2 yon, normal distribution, meron tayong ginamit na notations, P at saka Q. Under po yan ang binomial probability distribution. I'm not sure lang kung chapter 1 ba yun or chapter 2. Sa binomial probability distribution or binomial experiment, meron tayong dalawang outcomes from the word bi. Ibig sabihin, kung ano ang mag-a-appear, kung ano ang resulting outcome, yun yung tinatawag nating success. And kung ano yung outcome na hindi mapipili or hindi lalabas sa ating trial, yun ang tinatawag na failure. P, ito yung ating success, and yung Q, ito yung ating failure. Okay, pero ang tawag dito ay population proportion. In place dun sa ating population mean, kasi sa one sample z-test and t-test, ang ginagamit natin doon ay population mean. Pero dito, ang gagamitin natin ay sample proportion at saka population proportion. Yan. So ito yung gagamitin natin na terms instead of having mean. And then, ang ating n is the number of observations or kung ilan yung ating samples. And we are going to use the formula for P hat and Q. Kasi sa problem natin, hindi po yung given. tayo ang magko-compute ng Q at ng P hat. Yung value ng ating Q ay nakadepende kung ano ang value ng P. Ang population proportion, ito naman ay laging given sa problem. Kasi ito yung gagamitin natin na basis for testing the hypothesis. And then yung P hat naman, nakadepende po yun sa sample natin, sa sampling distribution, and dun sa ating total number of samples. So the formula is x divided by n for Q, 1 minus P. So as you can remember, ang sample proportion ay ginagamit natin para malaman kung ano ang chance, kung ano yung ating probability or percentage having the sample. Kasi ito, national proportion to. Itong ating P. Ito namang P hat natin is ano yung percentage natin with reference dun sa ating sample. And then ang Q natin, so ito yung failure. And to get Q, kung given ang P sa problem, isusubtract lang from 1 and that will be the value of Q. Usually naman, ito ay naka-fraction or decimal. Since ang pinag-uusapan natin dyan ay proportion, it is also called percentage of the population. Okay? So please take note on the following formulas. Also, yung notation na ginagamit natin. And then, for our procedure, same lang to sa procedure natin sa one sample z-test under part 2. Meron lang tayong changes dito sa step number 4. Kasi may iba yung formula natin. And then, yung hypothesis natin, instead of using mu, ang symbol natin, di ba, yung parang cursive na M, we are going to replace it by P. Kasi population na yung ating pinag-uusapan. But the phrases, the key terms, the symbols are all the same, katulad ng ginamit natin sa one sample z-test. Okay? Katulad nga ng nasabi ko kanina, magkakaroon lang tayo ng different interpretation sa ating problem, but the step-by-step procedure is the same. So let us try number 1. A recent survey done by the Philippine Housing Authority, or PHA, found that 35% of the population owns their homes. In a random sample of 240 heads of households, 78 responded that they own their homes. At the 0.01 level of significance, does that indicate a difference from the national proportion? So ang goal naman natin dito, that's why we are conducting hypothesis testing, is para malaman natin kung meron bang difference ang ating population proportion sa ating sample proportion. Okay? So if we have found significant difference between the two parameters or statistics, that's when we reject the null hypothesis. But kung wala tayong makikita ang difference, pareho ang value ng population and sample proportions, therefore, we are going to accept the null hypothesis. Okay? And ibig sabihin nun, yung estimation natin ay valid. So, analyze nyo muna yung problem and then state all the given. Make sure to put a proper notation. Tatlo lang yung notation natin dyan kasi yan lang yung given sa problem. X, N, and P, where X is the number of sample. Ito yung itetest natin whether pareho ba yan sa national proportion or hindi. Ang N natin is the total sample size, that is 240. P is 35%. It is the population proportion or equivalent to 0.35. make sure to transform it to decimal para hindi tayo magkaroon ng mistake kapag nasa computation part na. And then, we are going to use 1% or 0.01 level of significance. Gagamitin natin ang significance level para malaman natin ang area of the critical region and para makapag-decide tayo whether to accept or to reject. Okay? And then, next step natin after giving all the values is to identify whether it is a two-tailed test or one-tailed test. Okay? Kapag merong direction na given sa ating problem, it is called a one-tailed test. And pipili tayo whether to the left or to the right. Meron tayong right-tailed test and meron din tayong left-tailed test. Kapag wala namang given direction sa ating problem, that is when we apply the two-tailed test. Sa two-tailed test natin, it's either equal yung ating population proportion and sample proportion or not equal. Okay? So dito sa ating problem, wala namang nabanggit na direction. Please refer to the table presenting all the terms, phrases na pwede nating gawing clue para malaman yung type of test. Yun po yung tinatawag natin na direction. Okay, like more than, less than, decrease, increase. Pero kapag walang naka-indicate sa problem, ibig sabihin, we are going to apply a two-tailed test. Sa two-tailed test, ang symbols na ginagamit natin ay equal for null hypothesis, not equal for alternative hypothesis. And according sa problem natin, it is proven that 35% of the population owns their homes. Ibig sabihin, ang i-claim natin dyan is yung may equal sign, which is the null hypothesis. Okay? So, do not be confused on how to identify your claim. Lagi naman yung stated sa problem natin. All you have to do is to analyze yung ating given values para malalagay nyo sa ating hypothesis. Okay? Remember last time that whatever the value of the population mean, that is also the value for K. Yung K, ito po yung ating tinetest. Okay? And then, since proportion ang ating topic, therefore, whatever the value of the proportion, the population proportion, that is also the value of A. Kasi ang goal naman natin dito is malaman kung may difference or wala. That's why we are going to compare the population proportion and yung ating K. Yung K, ito po yung kine-claim natin. Okay, so please be reminded that the null hypothesis is our claim. Why? Again, because ang ating given population proportion based from the recent survey is 35% or 0.35. And then follow the step-by-step procedure. Set up the hypothesis and identify the claim. Meron pa din tayong dalawang hypothesis. H0 is the null hypothesis. H1 is the alternative hypothesis. That is given by P is equal to 0.35 and P is not equal to 0.35. So nakapag-decide na tayo kanina kung ano yung claim natin, and that is the null hypothesis. Wherein na-prove naman sa recent survey that this is equal to 35%. That's why yun yung gagamitin natin for our claim. Okay? And then, step number 2, set the level of significance. That is given by alpha is equal to 0.01 Do not assume for the value or level of significance kasi researcher lang yung may right na mag-provide ng level and lagi naman yung stated sa ating problem. Step number 3, determine the critical value of Z. Remember, nang ina-apply natin dito is traditional method. That's why ang gagamitin pa rin natin ay t-test table. So far, meron na tayong 2 tables na na-discuss, yung Z-table at saka T-table. Pero dito, since traditional method nga tayo, and sa traditional method, it is very important na malaman natin yung significance level. So, ang gagamitin natin ay ito. Okay? Again, remember sa traditional method, mahalaga ang presence ng significance level. Ito yung nandito. Yan. So, from 0.5 na nandyan at saka dito sa 0.001. Mahalaga ang presence ng significance level para makapag-decide tayo whether i-accept or i-reject. And that is under the traditional method. So first, identify muna natin or hanapin yung type of test. And according sa step 1, ang type of test natin ay two-tailed test. And then dito sa may box na red, i-locate ang sagot natin sa step number 2 or yung ating significance level, and that is 0.01. Yan. Ibig sabihin, dito sa column na to, dyan natin makikita ang critical value of Z. Yung intersection ng ating Z values at ng ating level. Okay? And then, since ang ating sample size ay greater than 30, that is 240, so definitely dito tayo titingin sa bottom part kasi z-test na yung i-apply natin. Yan. Diyan tayo titingin sa bottom part ng values. And then kung ano ang magiging intersection, yun po yung ating Z critical. And their intersection is 2.576. And since two-tailed test yan, meron tayong value to the right or pwedeng ang value natin ay to the left. So isang positive at isang negative, 2.576. Please take note on that. Dito lang kayo titingin sa bottom part kasi nga ang ating sample size ay more than 30. Okay? And then, step number 4, calculate the sample proportion or the test value using z-score. State all the given from the problem. X is 78, N is 240, P is 35% or 0.35. And sa formula natin, kakailanganin natin ang Q at saka P hat. Tama? Kasi katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, hindi po yan given sa problem. Tayo ang magko-compute. So first, hanapin muna natin ang value ng Q. That is given by 1 minus P. So yung value ng P natin is isusubtract lang from 1. So 1 minus 0.35 is equivalent to 0.65. Ito ang gagamitin nating value ng Q and ito ang P. Next is P hat. That is X over N. Para malaman natin ang percentage ng 78 people na nagsabi na pagmamay-ari nila ang kanilang bahay. Okay, so 78 divided by 240, that is 0.325. Ito yung P hat natin. And we are going to use P hat mamaya para malaman natin yung ating decision. So Z is equal to P hat minus P. divided by the square root of P times Q over N. And then substitute all the given values. P hat is 0.325 minus P, that is 0.35, divided by the square root of P times Q, 0.35 times 0.65 over N, that is 240. You may input this at once in your calculator. Pwede rin naman na mag 1 by 1 para maiwasan natin ang error. Subtract muna yung nasa taas. And then sa denominator, unahin yung nasa loob ng radical and parentheses. So multiply nyo muna itong dalawa. And then i-divide by 240. Kapag meron na kayong result sa loob ng radical, pwede nyo nang kuhanin ang square root. Okay? And then kapag meron na kayong result sa numerator and denominator, pwede nyo nang kuhanin ang quotient. And the resulting quotient is negative 0.812. Remember, we are applying a two-tailed test. So, ibig sabihin, pwedeng mag-land to the left or to the right ang ating value. And since this is a negative number, ibig sabihin, maglo-locate tayo ng value sa left tail. Doon tayo magko-compare ng digits. Okay? So, meron na tayong sagot sa step 3 and step 4. We can now decide whether to accept or to reject the null hypothesis. Same po tayo ng criteria na gagamitin. Kapag ang Z computed ay mas mababa sa Z critical, accept. Kapag mas mataas naman, reject. Okay, Z computed, ito yung answer natin sa step number 4. Whereas the Z critical is the resulting answer na nakita natin from the table under step number 3. Okay? Remember, ang ating claim ay H0 or the null hypothesis. So let us check whether it is to be rejected or accepted. Compare the computed and the critical value. Ang computed value natin ay negative 0.812. Z critical is 2.576. And then compare nyo lang to. And ang gagamitin nating symbol ay less than. Why? Because a negative number is always less than sa positive number. According yan sa rules ng mathematics. Okay? So, kung less than yung gagamitin natin, therefore, we will accept the null hypothesis. Okay? Compare nyo lang yung dalawang numbers and then decide. And kapag in-accept natin ang null hypothesis, which is also our claim, therefore, pwede natin masabi that the null hypothesis is true. So, kung babalikan natin yung question, does that indicate a difference from the national proportion? The answer is no. Why? Kasi na-prove natin na ang ating hypothesis or null hypothesis na P is equal to 35% is true. Tama? Napatunayan natin na walang significant difference between the population proportion and the sample proportion. That's why we are going to accept the claim that is the null hypothesis. Okay? And then, kung nalilito sa pagko-compare ng numbers, you can also apply the bell curve. I-locate lang ang ating critical values para malaman natin kung nasaan ang critical region. So, assume natin nandyan ang critical values. Ang ating critical region ay nandito sa part na yan. Ibig sabihin po, kapag ang Z computed natin ay maglaland dito sa may shaded part, i-reject ang null hypothesis. And kapag nandito sa walang shade, i-accept ang null hypothesis. Okay, and then locate 0.812. Negative yan, therefore nasa left tail. Assume natin na nandito ang negative 0.812 between 0 at saka negative 2. Therefore, we will accept the null hypothesis. Kasi nagland yan dito sa walang shade. Okay, so we will accept the null hypothesis katulad ng ating interpretation last time. And then provide the conclusion according sa ating decision and evidences. Since we accept the null hypothesis, we can conclude that there is not enough evidence to reject the claim that 35% of the Filipinos own their homes. Remember, ang ating hypothesis ay population proportion is equal to 35%. And ito rin yung ating claim. So kapag in-accept natin ang null hypothesis, which is our claim, definitely wala tayong enough evidence to reject this one because it is proven to be true and valid. So kapag true ang ating hypothesis or null hypothesis and in-accept natin ang null hypothesis or ang claim natin, therefore, it is a correct decision or a good decision. Hindi tayo makaka-encounter ng error from the alpha region. Okay? So that's for the first example. Okay, so continue po tayo. For the second example, the professional organization for private colleges and universities professors reported that more than 17% of professors attended a national convention in the past year. To test this claim, a researcher surveyed 200 professors and found that 45 had attended a national convention in the past year. At alpha is equal to 0.05, test the claim that this figure is correct using p-value method. So we are going to test their claim and we are going to use the p-value method to test the hypothesis. So ibig sabihin po, may maiiba lang sa ating procedure. Na-discuss ko naman last time kung ano yung procedure kapag p-value method. Kasi yung ginagawa natin sa one sample z-test, one sample t-test, and yung example 1, traditional method yung sinusunod natin. Wherein, malaki ang importance ng paggamit ng significance level para makapag-provide tayo ng decision and conclusion. While sa p-value method naman, magkakaroon tayo ng decision or conclusion without really establishing a significance level. Ibig sabihin, kahit p-value lang ang meron tayo, pwede tayong makapag-provide ng decision. But of course, gagamitin natin ang significance level para malaman natin kung nasaan ang critical region. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is, pwede natin gamitin ang p-value method or yung p-value mismo para makapag-provide tayo ng decision. Mamaya po ipapakita ko sa inyo kung paano tayo nagko-compare ng digits using p-value at saka alpha. Pero sa gagamitin nating table, para makapag-provide tayo ng p-value, hindi na natin gagamitin ito. Okay? Gagamitin na lang natin yan for illustration and for comparison. And sa p-value method, hindi po natin ginagamit ang t-table. Ang gagamitin natin dyan ay z-table. Okay? Remember, kanina nabanggit ko po, ginagamit natin ang t-table for traditional method kasi nilolocate natin doon yung significance level. Di ba naka-indicate doon sa taas kung one-tailed or two-tailed test? Okay, doon natin ginagamit ang t-table. Kasi important po yung ating significance level para makahanap ng value. Pero dito, since p-value ang i-apply natin, we are going to use the z-table. Sa z-table, ang kailangan lang natin dyan ay yung vertical at saka yung horizontal. So, kung natatandaan nyo pa, yung discussion natin sa normal distribution, that is under chapter 2, ganun po ulit yung ating gagawin dito sa vertical and horizontal. Okay? So, analyze nyo yung problem. Same pa din tayo ng notation. X, N, P, wherein X is 45. Ito yung ating sample na umattend ng National Convention in the past year with respect to the 200 professors na ating sample size. And then ang ating population proportion is 17%. That is also equivalent to 0.17. And yan po ang magiging value natin for K. Yan ang itetest natin whether meron bang difference or wala para makapag-decide tayo whether to accept or to reject the null hypothesis. So first, identify nyo muna kung ano yung type of test na gagamitin natin. And sa problem natin, meron pong nabanggit na direction. Therefore, ang i-apply natin ay one-tailed test. Pero syempre, alamin natin kung papunta saan yung direction. To the right ba or to the left? And we are going to use the phrase more than para malaman natin yung type of test. Ang more than po ay to the right. Therefore, ang gagamitin natin ay right-tailed test. Remember, yung term na more than ay positive. Kaya right-tailed test yung ating i-apply. So, please refer to the table I presented sa part 1 para hindi po kayo malito kung ano yung type of test na gagamitin given yung ating direction. Okay? Sa right-tailed test, ang ating symbols na ginagamit ay less than or equal para sa null hypothesis or H0, and then greater than naman para sa alternative hypothesis or H sub 1. And then, identify natin yung claim. Since ang ginamit dito ay yung term na more than, alin dito sa dalawang symbols ang nagpapakita ng more than? And that is the alternative hypothesis. Therefore, ito yung ating claim, yung H sub 1. And itetest natin kung may difference ba between this population parameter na 17% and dun sa ating mako-compute mamaya. Step number 1, set up the hypothesis and identify the claim. And so, na-explain ko na naman kanina yung ating hypothesis. P is less than or equal to 0.17. Whatever the value of the population proportion, yun din ang magiging value ng ating K. Alternative hypothesis, P is greater than 0.17. So, pareho lang ang value ng K natin. Pareho lang tayo ng itetest. And since more than nga, yung ginamit natin sa problem, ibig sabihin, ang ating claim ay alternative hypothesis because this symbol represents the terms more than. Okay? Kaya huwag kayong malilito sa paggamit ng symbols. If it opens to the right, ang tawag dyan ay less than. If it points to the right, ang tawag dyan ay greater than. Okay? Step number 2, calculate the test value. Skip na po natin ang setting of significance level kasi p-value method naman ang i-apply. Kaya ang magiging step number 2 na natin ay calculate the test value. Okay? Unahin po natin ang calculation bago tayo maghanap sa table. Kasi yung makakalculate natin dito, yun po yung gagawin nating basis. Yun ang ilolocate natin sa z-table para malaman natin ang p-value. Okay? Kasi sa ating traditional method, di ba, nauuna tayo maghanap sa table. Kasi nga, given yung ating significance level kesa sa pagko-compute. So dito, balik na rin natin yung process. Calculate the test value, state all the given, and then find Q at saka P hat. So ang ating failure is 0.83 or 83% given by 1 minus P, that is 0.17. And then ang P hat natin is 45 divided by 200, that is x over n. And the answer is 0.225. Please round off your answer to 3 decimal places. And again, yung sample proportion, gagamitin po natin to para makapag-decide tayo later sa ating evidences. And then write your formula, then substitute. Na-explain ko na naman kanina kung paano mag 1 by 1 computation. So dito, sundin nyo na lang yung process o kaya pwede nyo namang ilagay lahat sa calculator. And then mag-decide tayo kung ano yung ating answer based dun sa ating solution or computation. And that is 2.07. And please round off your answer to 2 decimal places. 2 decimal places na lang. Kanina, di ba, 3 decimal places? Kasi pinapattern po natin sa ating critical value. Pero dito, since z-table ang gagamitin natin, having vertical and horizontal values, kailangan natin mag-round off to 2 decimal places. Okay? Take note on that. Ang vertical natin ay yung first 2 digits. So, gamitin natin from 2.0. Tapos, ang horizontal natin ay z minus the vertical. So, kung ang vertical natin ay 2.0, 2 minus 2, that is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0, and then bring down 7. Okay? So may values na tayo for vertical and horizontal, 2.0 and 0.07. That's why kailangan tama yung pag-round off nyo. Hindi kayo pwedeng mag-round off dito sa ating process kasi baka maka-affect yun dito sa ating final answer. Final answer lang tayo magra-round off. Halimbawa, ang nakuha niyong sagot dyan ay 2.06, which is dapat 2.07. So, makaka-apekto po yan dito. Magkakamali kayo ng value ng P. Okay? So, dapat tama dito pa lang. And then, before natin hanapin sa table, pakita ko lang yung illustration para alam nyo po kung saan tayo mag-subtract. Kasi sa ating normal distribution, nag-subtract tayo from 1 saka from 0.5. Depende sa format ng ating curve. Okay? So ito yung curve natin. Ang population proportion ay located dito sa center, given by 17% or 0.17. And then, same pa rin po tayo ng level of significance. Ang nire-represent pa rin nun ay yung ating error or alpha. Ibig sabihin, nandito sa area na to ang ating critical region. And kapag nag-land dito ang p-value natin, na makikita natin sa table, ire-reject ang null hypothesis. Kapag nandito naman sa walang shade, accept the null hypothesis. The question is, kailan tayo nagma-minus from 1 and nagma-minus from 0.5? Kapag ganito ang ating format, nandito ang shaded part natin sa dulo, mina-minus po natin yan from 1. Kapag ang format naman natin ay ganito, yan. So let's say nandito ang critical value, tapos ang critical region natin ay nasa tabi ng population proportion or nasa middle, ima-minus natin yan from 0.5. Okay? Na-discuss ko naman to last time pa. Hindi ko lang sure kung tandaan nyo pa. Kaya nire-refresh natin. Okay? Basta ganito yung format natin, subtract from 1. Kapag ganito naman, either right or left yun ha. Since symmetrical naman yan, so ima-minus natin from 0.5. And since sa ating problem, ganito yung format, magma-minus tayo from 1. So hanapin muna natin ang critical value or ang p-value natin. Ito yung tinatawag na z-table. Baka tandaan nyo pa, yan po yung ginamit natin sa chapter 2. And dito, meron lang tayong vertical at horizontal. Okay, wala kayong makikita dyang significance level. Therefore, makakapag-provide tayo ng p-value without using the significance level. Kaya in-skip natin kanina. Tama? So, ang p-value natin ay makikita dyan. Ang ating vertical value ay 2.0. According yan sa step number 2. And ang ating horizontal ay 0.07. Okay? Kasi ang computed value natin kanina, 2.07. So, kapag in-add mo tong 2.0 at saka ito dapat ang sagot. And kung ano yung intersection ng dalawa, yun po yung magiging value natin for P. That is 0.9808. And hindi pa ito yung final answer natin. Kasi hindi ito nagsimula sa origin. Ibang table kasi yung gamit natin. That's why we are going to subtract from 1. Remember, ang ating illustration ay ganito. Nandito yung shaded part natin sa dulo. Kaya natin isusubtract from 1. 1 minus 0.9808, that is 0.0192. Ito yung magiging value natin for P. Tama? So, nakuha natin ang p-value kahit hindi gumagamit ng significance level. Okay, or 1.92%. So, please take note on this kasi gagamitin natin yan for establishing the decision. Hindi na natin gagamitin yung criteria kanina. Ang gagamitin na natin ay yung diniscuss ko sa part 1. So, balikan natin ang hypothesis testing using p-value. Ano ba yung tinatandaan natin dyan? Kapag ang p-value ay mas mababa sa ating alpha, ire-reject ang null hypothesis. Kapag ang p-value natin ay mas mataas sa alpha, i-accept ang null hypothesis. Yung p-value natin, ito po yung nakita natin sa table, yung i-minus natin from 1. And then, ang alpha naman natin, ito yung significance level. So, i-compare natin yung dalawang numbers. Kapag mas mababa, i-reject. Kapag mas mataas, i-accept. So, going back to the numbers, comparison of numbers, Ang p-value natin ay 0.192. Ito yung p-value natin. Ang alpha natin or yung level natin ay 0.05. Compare nyo lang itong dalawa. Siyempre, input nyo yung proper symbol. Either it is less than or greater than. And since 0.0192 is less than 0.05, we are going to reject the null hypothesis. Okay? So, balikan ulit natin. Tandaan, 0.05 ang ginamit. Ito po. Kapag ang p-value natin ay mas mababa sa 0.05, reject the null hypothesis. That's why tama yung decision natin na ni-reject. Okay? Palatandaan lang dyan, basta mas mababa ang p-value sa given alpha na nasa problem, i-reject. Kapag mas mataas naman sa alpha, i-accept. Okay? So, ito yung illustration natin kanina. I-locate lang natin yung sample proportion. Ito po yung ating critical region. Ang kailangan nating i-test is yung sample proportion. Kung mag-i-equal ba yon sa ating national proportion. So, locate natin. Sample proportion is 0.225. Ito po yung na-compute natin sa step number 2. So, balikan nyo na lang yung slide. And then, ang kanyang p-value ay 0.0192. Therefore, kapag ang value natin ay nandito sa may shade, nasa critical region, we are going to reject the null hypothesis. Okay? Take note, ito yung ating safe region. Ibig sabihin, sa side na to, ina-accept natin ang null hypothesis. Kaya lang dito, dyan natin nilocate, na-locate yung ating value. That's why we are going to reject the null hypothesis. Okay? Pero hindi kayo dito magbe-base ha. Kapag maglo-locate kayo, hindi ito yung gagamitin. Ito po ang i-compare nyo, itong dalawa. Kapag ang ginamit nyo ay illustration. Pero kapag numbers lang, comparison of numbers, etong 0.05 tsaka itong p-value ang gagamitin. Okay, para maiwasan natin ang confusion. So, nireject natin ang null hypothesis, but remember, ang claim po natin ay H sub 1. Ibig sabihin, pag nag-reject tayo ng null hypothesis, i-accept natin ang alternative hypothesis, which is our claim. This is good for the researcher kasi ma-accept ang kanyang claim. So let us provide the conclusion. Since we reject the null hypothesis, we can conclude that there is enough evidence to support the claim that more than 17% of the professors attended a national convention. Okay? Nireject natin ang null hypothesis. Ang claim natin ay P is greater than 17%, which is yung H1. And nireject natin ang null hypothesis. Therefore, meron tayong enough evidence to support our claim that the population proportion is greater than 17%. So this hypothesis is proven to be true and valid.